What's going on, everybody? My name is Nick.
And my name is Dave.
And this is the Deep Dive, and we are in our fourth or fifth week of this.
Who knows?
Yeah, the summer series.
It's a summer
However long
series.
of the summer it's gone.
I haven't been counting them, but yeah.
We're in our storyteller series, and today we're talking about the sheep and the goats.
Yeah.
And it's a good story, and I guess I just never put it together. This was one of the last ones that Jesus taught, or the last one.
In Matthew's gospel, it is the last teaching before, of course, he's teaching even on the cross, but it was of his public ministry is really,
Right.
yeah. So
Probably using
we'll
these
talk about that.
parables and stuff like that.
Yeah, yeah. We'll talk about that.
Well, let's get into it.
Okay.
All right, Dave, how are you doing, man? You went on vacation this past week, a little bit.
For a couple of days, but I saw you this week. I left after the service last Sunday.
Correct.
Went up to Asheville. Both of my kids, they're grown and married, and we were all there. It was my daughter-in-law's birthday, and we had a nice little trip away. And then I came back Tuesday night.
And you got to go rafting, right? Or
we actually ended up not doing that. But what we did do was we went to a farm and picked blueberries and blackberries, and then we went back and canned them.
Ooh. Did you eat any fresh?
Oh, they were all fresh.
So good, right?
Oh, yeah.
I mean, I'm just saying, like, you pulled it off and ate it? Or
Of
did you
course,
wash it? Okay.
yes.
Just making sure.
Yeah, I have to sample them, yeah. Free samples, yeah.
That's right, that's right. Well, Dave, again, you talked about the sheep and the goats today. Why don't we jump into the sermon a little bit, kind of give us a recap of that, and we'll deep dive it from there.
Okay. I talked about in the introduction that this is the last parable, and so I think it's one we should particularly pay attention to of all the parables. He taught many, many, many parables. But the context of it is the last days, the last things, Son of Man returning. And so Jesus in chapter 24, this is from chapter 25 in Matthew, but in chapter 24, Jesus comes out of the temple and, says some things about, like, you see this incredible building, I'm telling you, not one of these stones is going to be remain on, they're all going to fall when the Son of Man comes. So the disciples then start quizzing him about, well, when's that going to be? What are going to be the signs and all that stuff? So through 24, Jesus does teach on that, but it leads into this talking about the parables and about getting ready. And so he tells this parable, which I think most people are familiar with it. I'll just briefly summarize it, is that he said, when the Son of Man comes, he's going to, in the final judgment, he's going to separate people as the sheep from the goats.
Yep.
And so the goats get to be the bad people in this scenario. And so, the sheep are going to go on to their reward, go to heaven, and the goats are going to go into the eternal fire.
Right.
And so and then he said, and he goes through this whole litany of things, as he addresses each of them individually, because, I was hungry, you didn't give me anything to eat. I was naked, you didn't give me any clothes. I was in prison, you didn't come visit me. I was sick. And he goes through this whole litany of things. And each time, both the goats and the sheep, they said, when was that exactly? Because we didn't know it was you.
Yeah.
And so I think it's significant that the sheep also did not know that it was him. I think there's something to be said that's just in their DNA to be that way.
Yeah.
And, I feel like lots of times we put on good behaviors. We can be like the goats, and we can also be jerks. And so, it's almost like they're saying, like, well, if we had known that it was you, Jesus, we certainly would have taken care of it.
It was shaped up a little bit.
Right. So, and so there's a lot there.
Yeah.
I think it's a pretty straightforward parable. One thing I didn't mention was that, I don't preach a lot of judgment. I preach a lot about grace. But I want to be clear that there is judgment, and it's based on maybe not the things that some people might think that it might be. It's not how many Bible verses you know, or how many times you went to church, or how much money you gave. but it seems to be about our treatment of the least and the last and the lost. And so, anyway, that it sort of broke down to that, and, I think we all struggle. I mean, I struggle with, sometimes being a jerk and sometimes.
For sure. I mean, we all have those moments when, and I think you even kind of alluded to when you're having bad days or whatever, that sometimes we're not perfectly ourselves. But I would like to start with something you talked about, and you kind of told the story of you were watching football, a Super Bowl party, and once people kind of found out who you were, they kind of were more apologetic. And that's something that relates to me very well, because being in youth ministry and stuff like that, like I probably never got it as bad as you kind of gotten it along the way, but I do feel like I've been in a lot of social situations where people are like, oh, he's here. Like we gotta clean it up or say it different or
language. And and I don't want to say that I'm a prude and get offended at all. But it is like, why would you do that? It's like we have certain types of behavior that are reserved for certain places, whether it's church behavior, we put on church, and that's understandable. We all do it. But, I remember, I didn't share this, but I thought about it this week. I remember one time I was on the phone with the bank, and because there was something wrong with my account, and I was getting terrible customer service. And so I was being pretty testy and jerky. And so, the last few cards that I've gotten, I haven't put this on there, but like they'll ask for your title. So I put Reverend. And so the woman is, well, let me get your information. She says, oh, I see I'm speaking to Reverend Benson, which made me feel about this day, because I had been pretty hostile
called out
at that time. So, we can all do it. But yeah, that does happen. And sometimes people are just kidding, but this particular scenario is the guy did not know I was a preacher, didn't know who I was. And so I'd spent 30 or 45 minutes with him, and by that time, I'd heard every word and other things. And so, when he finds out that I'm a preacher, I've never seen somebody. I was uncomfortable with how embarrassed he was.
Yeah.
And it's not about me, but the question would be, why would you talk that way anyway?
Yeah.
And the other thing I made this example too was like I couldn't think of an exact example, but I know I've done this where, like, I'm talking to somebody and I may be talking negatively about somebody, and then the person will say to me, "Well, that's my husband," or "That's my cousin," or something like that. Yep. And then it's like, oh gosh, I'm so embarrassed. But maybe we shouldn't talk that way at all. Maybe that would be a good line. Always speak and treat one another as if, I guess from the parable, it was Jesus that we're speaking to. Yeah.
But it also goes back to, what you kind of led off with in terms of how both the sheep and the goats were like, wait, when did this happen?
Right.
As opposed to, one side's probably thinking like, I just want to know. And the other one's like, so you were where? Like, how did I miss this or whatever? But it kind of is a call. And I think what you're saying is like, don't wait for the right people to be around to show your goodness or your kindness or whatever. Just be kind. Like, just do it. You know what I mean? Like,
you're doing it unto Jesus. And, and there's a lot that I did not go into is what that means. Jesus seems to have a preference for the poor.
Right.
All throughout scriptures, you cannot read the scripture and not see that. And here he not only says that we should do this, but he identifies when you've done it also unto me.
Yeah.
And so, we've been talking a lot about like our language and gossiping, that sort of things, but just in language of how we care and love for one another. And back to like them not knowing when it was Jesus, when it was, maybe we should be living our life all the time like that.
Do you think that it's a specific focus for like the poor and downtrodden type, or is it like he's kind of saying like you should do it even for these people? Does this make sense? Like it encompasses like all of the above, or like specifically those?
Well, yeah, I think it's all of the above, but here it's specifically. Jesus is definitely siding with the most vulnerable people in our culture. And you see that throughout his ministry.
Right.
Right. So, those who on the outskirts, that are on the fringes, those on the margins, the vulnerable.
Yeah.
We need to be paying particular attention to those, because that, we can be pretty judgmental. I mean, I don't know about you, but lots of times I'll see a homeless person or whatever, and I don't know their story. I don't know what circumstances led to them being in the place where they were.
Right.
But I think part of our, and I'll get to this in a second, but I talked about like 4 different practices that we can have. But one of those was gratitude. I think that we need to realize that, but for the grace of God, we could find ourselves in the situation.
Yeah.
And I've heard it, and it would probably be the case for me. Like if I lost my job, how long would it be?
Right.
How many weeks could I go? How many months? I'm at a point in my life, because I'm older, it might be months, but like there was times in my life I couldn't miss a paycheck.
Yeah.
I would, I wouldn't be able to pay my bills, and so living a life with that sort of understanding, that but for the grace of God go we, doesn't make us better than people.
Yeah.
And in fact, we have a responsibility in caring for those people in vulnerable situations.
Sure, for sure.
Yeah.
Well, why don't you kind of give us, you in your sermon, you did kind of lay out 4, I like the way you said, practices, things that we can kind of practically do to try to kind of move our mind more into an area of looking out for the least of these, but also kind of setting ourselves up to kind of be in that sheep category of people who are following God and maybe not even always consider it, but we're just doing what we feel like we should be doing.
I think the world does a number on us to make us live self-centered lives.
Yes.
That is the way of the world. And so if we're not careful, we can find ourselves, in living in that sort of sense of entitlement. And so how do we move ourselves to have that DNA so that, Jesus shows up and, we're not even aware that it's him, because it's the way that we're treating everybody.
Yeah.
And so the 4 practices that and there could have been more. And, and none of this, I mean, sometimes when I preach sermons like this, it's like, well, that wasn't very deep, but in some ways it is, because it's so hard to live. Easy to say, hard to do.
Sure.
So the first one was to put yourself last.
Yeah.
There was a famous book, you're way too young to remember, it was called I Am Third. It's by a football player named Gale Sayers.
Yeah.
And it was, God is first, others are second, I am third. And so begin to think about like, that putting people before you, other people's needs, other people's wants before your own. And this isn't to say, and there's this sort of slippery slope of like, well, people have a really bad self-esteem. It's like, I'm not worth anything, and so everybody else is better than me. This is kind of the opposite of that. Yeah. This is from a place of empowerment to put other people before you. Yeah. That we make a decision to do that and to practice that. And I use the example of like I had a pastor mentor when I was first church I ever worked in, associate pastor. And he said, it was a potluck or something. And, I don't know that I was first in line, but he said, you might just want to consider this. Throughout your ministry, go last at potlucks. Yeah. Let everybody else go, then you go. And I've never forgotten that. And it's been a good practice, and nobody probably even notices it. But I do. Yeah. And it reminds me to put other people before you. So, if you have a chance to find a way to put somebody in, I know that's a very concrete example, but, But
I think it's something easy to relate to, because whether it's a potluck line or, we've all been to those like family gatherings where everybody's kind of standing waiting for somebody to go first or whatever. You know what I mean? Like, like we always kind of see these like class type things or, just even in restaurants or whatever.
in the letter to the Colossians, Paul says to outdo one another in love.
Yeah.
And I've used that a lot with both premarital counseling, and I actually have said it in at weddings to couples. You know, that like you get into this mindset of trying to, like, you know, always putting the other before your needs.
Yeah.
And so in marriage, I mean, there's compromise and give and takes, but maybe like not so me trying to always get my way.
Yeah.
That from a servant's heart say, well, you know, let your spouse do that. If you're trying to outdo one another in love, that's about the only competition we should have, is trying to outdo one another in love and kindness. And so, so that was the first one. The second one was this thing about having empathetic listening.
Vision.
And this is something we've addressed before. This is like being curious, not judgmental.
Right.
This is the old seeking first to understand, then to be understood. Because in the world the deeply divided world that we have, where when we see a person not as a person, but as the enemy, as a threat, because maybe they have different political beliefs than us, or they have, whatever, to stop for a second and say, I wonder what's going on in their lives.
Yeah.
Now, we're talking about politics and beliefs now, but also when we encounter people at the store, in the line at Chick-fil-A or whatever, and they're just, they're being nasty, they're being a jerk, is just to take for a second, because my initial response or immediate response is to be defensive, right?
Yeah.
But to say, hey, maybe we don't know what's going on in their lives right now. Maybe they're not feeling well today. Maybe they just got some really bad news.
Yeah.
We don't know someone else's story.
Well, something, and I'm not sure you've said it on the podcast, but something you said around me many times, not necessarily to me, is that, like, your goal as a minister is to be a minister to everybody.
Yeah.
And I was actually having a conversation with somebody this week around, the kind of charged political season we're walking into and stuff like that. And they were asking me, how I handle, like, people who might have different beliefs than me. And I just kind of simply said, like, I just look at them as there's somebody, I look at them from the middle. Like, I'm not trying to meet them in extremes. I'm just trying to look at the person for who they are right there in front of me. And I'll hear you out, whatever extreme you're on, but don't expect me to join. I ask them not to expect me to join them in those extremes, because I want to be able to have a conversation with everybody. You know what I mean? Essentially.
Right. And we can have beliefs, we can have opinions, but I think when dealing with one another, if we're doing these other things, the practices that I'm talking about, if we are putting others before ourselves, when we are practicing sort of empathetic listening, and really trying to hear what the other person say. When I'm going to, the next two are the attitude of gratitude, practicing gratitude and practicing kindness. When we're doing that, I think we're going to naturally come to a place where maybe we can have civil discourse.
Yep.
But when we start out immediately with, I have already vilified that person, they are evil, they are an existential threat to our world.
Yep.
That person's never going to hear you in your opinion.
Well, and especially if you walk into that as, like, I hear you're a Democrat or a Republican, and I'm assuming you're all the way here or all the way there or whatever. And, like, I've made my judgment before you've said a word.
Right, yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
They've already decided who you are, what you are.
Exactly.
Even before you, and I hate that.
Yeah.
But, lots of times, I mentioned, like, seeing a homeless person, whatever, but lots of times I'll see people at a store or something, and they're behaving a certain way, and I've already made these judgments about this person and their life and what they stand for and all that stuff before. I don't know their story. I don't know why. This may be a one-off for them. They may be the nicest person in the world, or life might have been cruel to them in such a way in which that's just their way of existing in the world.
Right.
They've been knocked down so many times that they just get up with their elbows out. And so, they're never going to change from being hostile to them or not being listening to them. They're only going to change by love and kindness in listening to them, if they ever do.
Yeah.
And regardless, we should be treating them that way because it affects who we are.
Right. And I think that's what Jesus called us into, even with when he's saying the last, the lost, and all that stuff. And like, it's not to make an assumption of who they are, where they are, what they are. It's meeting them in love, and it's that empathetic vision, empathetic hearing, that you were talking about.
The very next chapter in Matthew, in chapter 26, is when they have the Passover meal. Mm-hmm. And, there's been much said about this, but I actually think this is with Jesus knows all things, right? And he knew the heart. I mean, he knew the heart of Judas. But Judas had the place of honor. He was the host. And so the person sitting next to the host is the most honorable seat. Now, these are all these guys. That's where he had Judas sitting.
Yeah.
And I think that was by design, not to call Judas out, but to show him kindness and honor.
Yeah.
And so, a lot can be said about that and a lot to unpack about that. But, I think that's where we are to those who may have like extreme differences with us. If we go out of our way to be kind and accepting of them, not of their beliefs, but just accepting them as a human being, as a person.
Yeah.
We go, I think we model Jesus much more than we do for, regardless of what we think that person might stand for.
Sure.
And it could be they stand for a lot of really bad stuff,
Yeah.
but, we're not going to change them unless we love them.
Yeah. Again, it's not necessarily that you accept everything they say or believe everything they believe, but there's still a respect and a love that you show them. So your third one was?
My third one was about gratitude.
Yeah.
Just gratitude. And the last one was acts of kindness.
Yeah.
And there's always places, little places, and big places, but little places to be kind every day.
Yeah.
And if we can be more kind, the world is so unkind to people.
Yeah. I'm not sure where you had your graphic images, but in case you didn't see the sermon, the one on the gratitude is actually like a person writing a gratitude list.
Yeah.
And I want to say, like, if you are struggling with seeing anything good in your world, it's a really good practice. And I'm not even sure you really talked about that much, but like just that action. I've done it with kids in the past. I've done it myself in the past, just as like a reminder of everything's not as bad as it may seem around you. Sometimes we have a hard time looking outside the current circle we're standing in, but it's a good way to kind of see through some of those things and go, you know what, this is actually really good in my life. This is really good, and not just focus on those negatives. Because I think there's definitely seasons of life where it just feels like you keep getting hit or a wave or annoyances or frustrations or blah, 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 where it's hard to look outside of that. And when you find yourself in those situations, that this is actually a really good practice to do, is to to help kind of poke holes in the storm around you or whatever, so you can see the light.
Yeah, because life is hard.
Yeah.
And it may not get easier.
Right.
I mean, life is always going to be hard.
Yep.
Life is always going to be imperfect. Bad things are going to happen. But our response to them, is how, we decide to live.
Yep.
And so we do have a choice in the matter. We can choose to respond with kindness and love and patience and empathy, or we can respond another way. And, in the end, we're going to be judged for that.
Right.
Not that we should judge others, but we will be judged for that. So,
you kind of hit the main points of the sermon. I guess one last question to kind of maybe close us out is, do you have any strategies of how to kind of show these four things with somebody that feels hard to love in the moment? Maybe it's somebody that's hurt you. Maybe it's somebody that, has hurt somebody you love or whatever. Like, do you have any strategies for that?
There's a wide continuum here.
Sure.
And I do know that there are some abusive and toxic relationships, and that maybe the best thing to take care of ourselves is to step aside from that. Yep. We're talking about mental health here. because we are never going to be able to be our best self as long as we allow these things to happen in our lives. This is not what I'm talking about. That's extremes. That's like probably needs to work with a counselor or psychologist, that sort of stuff. So not to give that idea that somebody should stay in an abusive relationship or a toxic situation. Sometimes we just have to, you don't have to be a jerk about it.
Yeah.
You can be kind about how you do that. But, there are boundaries, there's necessary boundaries that we have. But in general, in the middle, that's what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
That's where I think we just have to find ourselves and walk that way. The goal would be to be healthy.
Yeah.
To be spiritually healthy, to be emotionally healthy, to be mentally healthy. Almost out of words here.
Yeah.
And so, that's what I would encourage. We all need help.
Yeah.
At one time or another in our life, all of us. I've had to seek out help many times.
Right.
And so, I think the goal is spiritual and emotional health, and I think in the middle, not the extremes, but in the middle, I think a way that we can have more self-esteem, have more health, emotional and spiritual health, is by these practices.
Sure. Well, thank you for that. Dave, we are kind of at our time where we like to wrap up. So I just want to kind of remind everybody, where at the Facebook, on the YouTube, you have any conversations, anything you'd like to add to what we've talked about, drop it there. There's little chat boxes below or comment sections. We'd love to have that discourse with you. Also, just kind of in the life of the church around here, if you are watching us in an area that you could kind of come make church, on August 4th is kind of our big launch back.
That's right.
For, I guess, school essentially. And we're doing a big picnic, like a barbecue picnic day, and have some fun games afterwards for the families and anybody who wants to take part. So we'd love to have you come out for that. That's August 4th. And after this, so that'll actually happen after the service. So come join us at 10 o'clock for the service. And then probably about 11:15, we'll start dishing up the meal and be last in the line so that I can go first. So, no, just joking. We'd love to have you guys, love to have you be a part of that.
Yeah. All right. Thanks, Nick.
Thank you, Dave. And we'll catch you guys next time.
All right. God bless everybody.